Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. As many of you will know, Call Your Hits is in its fifth year, which is crazy to think about. As we've said many times in the past, we started this as a bit of a COVID project, and here we are 200 some episodes later. And 5 years is quite a lot of time. I mean, it's longer than many of you have been playing Airsoft, for one thing. But it's also a long time for us to consider what we've been doing with Airsoft, what we enjoy about Airsoft, and for our opinions to change about what we feel is, the best. Also, a lot of time for technology to change. I mean, I think back to when we started, HPA was definitely not a thing. And now, judging by, everyone and how they play Airsoft, it's like the majority of people play with HPA now. And the minority, especially like when we went to Iron Horse, like the lineup for the HPA chrono was like 400 people deep. And then the AEG one, you just walk in. So 5 years is a lot of time for things to change. It's time for, Airsoft Innovations to go under and us to change, grenade suppliers and, all this kind of stuff. And so today, what I thought we would do is we would listen to some clips of ourselves over the past, since the start of the podcast, basically. So I tried to select stuff that was earlier rather than more recent stuff and play back some things that we have said and see whether or not, firstly, is that even still true, for one thing? Is it still a fact? And also, do we still agree with what we had to say back then?
And legitimately just, 5 years is like, oh wow, it's been 5 years.
Yeah.
I feel like we both feel that way about it. It's just
definitely. And I mean, time flies when you're having fun. And I think, we definitely have not seen the years go by, so to speak. I mean, I definitely feel them on my body, my lower back, etc. But, in terms of the time, yeah, it goes by. And sometimes you don't really consider, what did I used to think 5 years ago? How did I used to feel about a particular thing 5 years ago? So this is sort of going to be a little bit of a time capsule. I mean, aside from people like Matt, who go and listen to the podcast from start to finish, basically all the time, most of us will just listen to it one time and then sort of move on and not necessarily go back to it. So I think hopefully some of the things that we're going to listen to are going to be a bit of a surprise. I mean, they're not a surprise to me because I picked them out, but hopefully the ensuing conversation will be interesting. So without further ado, let's listen to the first clip.
One thing first. I do want to state before we start that I've been promised that this is not just an effort to get me with things I've previously said. So I hope the viewers will feel that.
That's fair. It certainly started that way. But then my kinder self and also more sensible self, as I was listening, just to give a peek behind the curtain here, I just listened to episodes, and when I heard something that I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, I just sort of like marked it. Initially, it started off as like me. It's like, all right, what stupid things did Pat say, and how can I pull them out? And as it turns out, I mean, you can take this however you want. Either you say way too many stupid things, or there wasn't actually that much stupidity going on.
I found myself wondering if like Matt has cataloged all the dumb things I've said, or if he wants to do that the next time he listens to his
maybe
podcast.
that's a project for him. All right, so let's get into it now. Let's listen to this first clip. What is your favorite camo pattern?
My favorite camo pattern, I'm definitely gonna cheat a little bit here, is definitely my like just US World War II olive drab. I think it looks badass as hell. It's super comfy. It's they're wool trousers, but like we live in Newfoundland, it's cold here most of the time.
It's true.
And no, it's surprisingly, it's decently practical. It's not the most practical camo I've ever used here at all. But it is really, I like it a lot.
All right.
I mean that still works really well.
Would you say it's your favorite still, though?
No, I can't say that. But I mean, I've also become less of a like camo Luddite in the last like year and a half. That being said, like my go-to bottoms are still either just like OD pants with knee pads or sort of coyote brown ones, like, if we're running sort of a 10 team kind of thing. Upper most of the time these days is either US Woodland or Fleck Iron, because I like both of those and they work really well here. And I I'll totally cop to the fact that they both work better than the olive drab.
Definitely, especially
Um,
the World War II olive drab, which I find was brighter in many ways than, like, you think about like the 1980s Canadian Forces olive drab that you see a lot of surplus around here. I found that the World War II one was really, maybe because it was also like new, because yours was repro as opposed to a lot of the surplus stuff, which is just surplus, so it's
yeah,
used
it's
and worn
definitely not
in.
as
Yeah.
like worn in, or like, it hasn't been washed as many times as the surplus stuff, but like, um yeah, it's definitely not as like dull a tone. It still works pretty well. Like, it'll still effectively conceal you here anytime that there's a lot of foliage.
Mhm.
Um,
But your favorite camo pattern, though? Like, I'm
I
not
mean,
thinking about like your
oh man,
favorite like article,
so
right?
like, so if we're not talking about like effectiveness, U.S. Woodland, like it's just, um, I want to look like the cool boy soldiers from like the action movies we watched when we were in high school and university, like early
Mm.
university. Um, I don't own it. I've never worn it. I have a weird affection for Chalky Chip, like, um, which I think is probably entirely the fault of Generation Kill, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, they
Um,
were woodland most of that anyway,
yeah, I
because
know. It's
what better
like,
camo to invade a desert country than U.S.
well,
woodland?
yeah, but it's the thing that like they wander by in like the background and
Yeah, for
stuff.
sure. Or the DCU, like
Um,
the three color desert or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But like, yeah, I U.S. Woodland works well here. Like, it's designed for the right kind of woods.
Hmm.
It's super cheap, it's super available, and I just think it looks cool. Um, it's very, cue the Marge Simpson. I just think it's neat.
Yeah.
Um, or alternately, for the Top Gear fans, this is awesome, but I like this.
Yes.
And like, I do still own, a bunch of stuff in U.S. Woodland. And like, it when we were running it almost exclusively, I don't feel like it ever let us down. Um, I also locally partly like it because less people wear it.
Yeah,
And
that's
like,
true.
not as much, like, partly, oh, I like being unique, but no, seriously, much more because if we're all wearing it, it makes positive ID of my teammates easier.
For sure. And
um,
we started wearing it because it looked good, but also because we wanted to have a different camo pattern than multicam, which everyone was wearing at the time
yeah,
too.
and it definitely was very much a, like, everyone locally was wearing multicam. Like, it had gone from being a thing that we were using to a thing that everyone was using, and it was
Yeah,
like,
so
oh,
common.
just,
Yeah.
again, that, like, man, it would be nice if it were easier to positive ID the 6-8 guys on my team that I'm playing with most of the time.
What's interesting about this question, and one of the reasons I pulled it out, is because at the time that I asked you this question, if you had asked me the same question, I would not have been able to give you the answer that I would give you today. Because today, my absolute favorite camouflage pattern is what?
Fuck darn.
No, it's
I
M90.
know, I'm just being a
Right?
dick.
But at the time we recorded that episode, I didn't know. Like, I'm sure M90 existed. I just did not know that it was a pattern. I was just not. It wasn't in my like, I don't know what the word is, but in my consciousness, like, wasn't aware of its existence.
I'm like,
So
it's really good.
yeah, but I mean, I guess the reason why I pulled this question out is because that's one really good example of, like, yeah, 5 years is like a long time, but it's a short time, but it's a long time, right? And that's one of the things that definitely changed in the landscape for me, is sort of like in the last 5 years, is sort of love of the M90, the Swedish M90, and the M90K. But that's a pipe dream. I will never own M90K. But yeah,
But yeah, I mean, it's a really, um this one's a good one to sort of, I think, keep in mind going forward too, in that new camo comes out and works well,
yeah,
and is in the range of affordability where, like, probably we should have it on our sort of, like, every year, at the end of the season, okay, do we want to look into new duds for this? And like, I mean, you and John are both like, yeah, collect the camo, so like, I know that'll sell well with some of my
yeah,
target
yeah,
audience,
yeah.
right?
I'm not sure if I'm gonna, like, once Cat Hat multi terrain comes out, if I'm really gonna go that route. But I mean, trying to find that is gonna be so impossible when it comes out. Well, I mean, it's already out for some units, but like, there's gonna be reproductions when it hits the mass market. I don't know if we're gonna go that route, but yeah.
Yeah,
All
things to
right,
think about.
you ready for clip number 2?
And that cost benefit analysis that Phil's talking about is really, at the end of the day, why I'm on a red dot again. More of the time where we play and when we play, I am inside of 50, 60 feet.
Yep.
engaging dudes, moving around in situations where being able to come up onto ready and shoot a target as quickly as possible is one of the most pivotal skills for what we're doing, where the extra magnification isn't providing me with tangible benefits, whether because of the distance or because of the wind or some combination of the two, let's be honest. And it just is not worth having that on my gun.
And then I built something stupid.
Yeah, so I thought I was looking for this one because I remember, having this conversation and sort of, flip flopping all the time, and without doing another episode on optics and getting Matt all riled up because he's like, you guys have done like 16 million of them. What changed specifically in the intervening period that makes it so that is no longer true for you?
I think like the biggest thing that changed is me realizing that I had, a grown-up's resources and not necessarily grown-up's self-control. In the sense that, like, when we recorded that, like, I'm pretty sure I was still running the replica length that I'm currently running. Like, I was running not the M27, but the previous sort of AR-15, which was the same barrel length. And frankly, not a whole lot less accurate per trigger pull. Like a bit. I do think the M27 as I have it built now is the nicest replica that I've used in terms of like shot to shot accuracy. But a big part of it, I think, genuinely is just I didn't know that you could get like a good 1 to 4x sort of shorter magnifier. I didn't know that you could get. I didn't believe that I'd be able to afford an actual like 1 to 4 that holds 0 that switches between that has better glass and that has good eye relief. Like I'd only experienced Airsoft ones, and like the best Airsoft magnified optics I've used are hot garbage by comparison to the Vortex that I'm using, and the Vortex is like the bottom of reasonable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And like I still have days where I think it'd be really cool to like toss a little red dot on top of the Vortex. But if I'm gonna do it, I'm also and like don't take this to the bank and go like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go buy one. But like I'm sort of in the point where I'd rather buy like a little doctor style red dot that's also real. Like I'd prefer to just put like I can afford, if I'm going to buy this, the price difference between a real one and an Airsoft one. And like that would be useful for snap shooting in the village and stuff. Although at this point, I've also like got a 416 in the other room that like is going to either become a new upper or something. Like, I have options.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely a big part of it. I think I remember like when you first bought the Vortex and you sort of it's slaps you in the face like a slippery fish kind of situation of like, wow, I had like no idea how, I guess, bad the Airsoft ones were or how good like real glass could be.
Yeah, or
and
both,
when you
really,
see that,
like
it's hard to unring a bell, as I like to say. And like once that happens, so that's certainly one thing. I think too, though, a big part of the change is also the change in you, which sort of started. I mean, one of the clips that I heard about was you talking about getting away from using plate carriers, right? Getting away from doing whatever Phil and Cal did, right? And just starting to do stuff that works for you. And I think when it comes to playing Airsoft, your style of play is not the style of play that leads you to regularly being up in people's grill.
Yeah,
right?
I'm happier
yes,
being further back and plinking. And like I think at the time I sort of had the idea that there needs to be a certain number of people door kicking on our team, and that regardless of like if 3 Storm Riders show up, it should be 3 Storm Riders who are door kicking. If 4 show up, then okay, it should still probably be 3 who are door kicking. And the reality at this point is you doing what is most effective for you and me doing what is most effective for me absolutely works better than either of us trying to mimic the other's playstyle for hypothetical benefits that don't
definitely
actually exist.
And like, I think for a very long time, even until recently, we've really overcomplicated what frontline was, right? it's too small, it's too inconsequential to do anything really other than very, very basic teamwork on larger objectives, like on like larger games fulfilled. And anything outside of that, man, it should be personal skills. Whatever works for you, just do that.
Yep. And
Right.
like I still
And
think
that's not to say that you can't coordinate and work with people, obviously, right? But I mean, just not overcomplicate stuff. Right.
yeah,
There
like
are no door kickers, right? We don't need door kickers. That's not a thing,
totally.
right?
And like
For our
I
field.
totally. And like I still think, in terms of like practicality of play there, I think radios are useful, period. I don't
Mhm.
care what kind of airsoft you're playing, they're worth the little bit of investment. I still think I'm going to carry some frags because like you're not always next to me to throw a frag when I need a frag
Yeah,
throw.
for sure.
But you're certainly right in terms of like replica, like, okay, so if I'm going to run them 27 at DMR velocities, which I definitely have done a bit of last season and I'm going to do a bit more of, then like I need to be carrying some sort of thing to shoot people who are closer than 50 feet. Not because, as you pointed out, you made a video for the local group that was like, this is what 50 feet actually looks like. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not actually going to be inside that often.
Mhm.
But just to have the option, right? Like I'd rather, given the choice, I would rather carry a sidearm and be able to draw the sidearm and shoot someone inside of 50 feet than have to back away in a situation where that's not good.
Yeah. So I,
Um,
I think, yeah, in the intervening period, having the resources to build the replica that you wanted, but also having the mental faculties, I guess, to just be comfortable doing what works for you more often rather than, and that's not to say you wouldn't do it, but it's like, if given time and opportunity, like, what do we get Pat to do? Well, stay back, shoot further, right? And then give us information so we can make good decisions up front, right?
yeah, and
That's
like,
all it needs to be.
and there's that just self-sufficiency, right? Of like, um, being a teammate and being a team player is really good. Realizing that there are ways you can be more effective that don't necessarily agree with like what everyone else is doing, and doing that is also really good. Like,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's definitely not a mindset we've always had. Like, there's definitely been periods where we've been like, no, we need to like hand meet glove as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah, and like very prescriptive about it, and that's
Yep.
just not. It's not a
You know,
thing.
You
All
learn.
right, let's listen to clip number 3.
So strategy is broadly, especially in terms of airsoft, right? Like you can talk about like the grand overarching strategy is not likely to be a thing in most airsoft games.
Yeah, Milsim games aside and stuff.
Yeah, and even in a milsim game, like you're not necessarily going to have 300 guys aside or 3,000 guys aside to have, like, oh, I will move
Still
my
true
tank
locally.
division here kind of strategizing, right? And like logistics and supply is comparatively a trivial problem for an airsoft player.
So,
That last bit is interesting because I don't agree with it anymore.
let's hear it.
Like, because we're still not going to have locally 300 people aside, and like even when like I'm less likely to travel. I'm not impossible, but I'm less likely to travel for airsoft than several of you guys are at this point. And if you're traveling for airsoft, I feel like you're not going to be like our teammates aren't going to be the people who need to worry about like dealing with having 300 players on a team for the most part. So there are still like logistics aspects. Yeah, okay. I do think like even for Milsim at Frontline, okay, I need to figure out having enough air to run an LMG for the day, preferably with as few pops back to reload it and refill it as possible. I need to carry as much ammo as I need to do the same thing. So like the logistics of self-sufficiency is definitely a factor. Logistics in terms of like having my team get supplies to me also actually was kind of a factor the last time we ran like the op that I played this past summer, in the sense that like there were points where it was better to have one of the guys who was supporting me where I was go grab frankly stuff I should have had with me anyway, but like water, food, BBs from my kit that I'd left in the fob, on the assumption that I'd be going back there regularly. When the reality of the play, and I think this may be a recurring thing when I'm running the LMG in a milsim game, where people are like, well, we're actually going to be better off avoiding him. And if where I am is effective and them avoiding me is what we want, then having me leave to go refill the BBs or whatever is really stupid, bluntly.
Yeah.
And so like I actually, yeah, I do think this is a thing that requires, thought. Like I I think still I've spent most of the winter hemming and hawing over like how I want to carry my air um for the upcoming season. And like I don't love any of the answers I've come up with. I like the backpack I have. It's pretty good. It can carry useful stuff. Slightly smaller backpack would also be great because it would weigh less and be easier to move around and stuff. Just buying a piece that straps like a hydration carrier or whatever that straps onto the back panel of my chest rig also would work. And be very cheap and just tuck the tank in and go. So I'm not completely sure what I want to do about that. For the larger game, though, like, I don't know if that means, like, if I went with the smallest bag possible or even the smaller one, it's like, okay, so what do I want to carry? What can I carry? Do I want to be having, like, a little, like, grab and go bag that's just, like, again, like a couple of bottles of water, some snacks, and some ammo that I can dump wherever I am actually playing, and treat that as sort of, just an operational requirement for if I'm going to have to sit here, I want this to be here, so I'm going to drop it here. And if I have to move around, okay, it can stay here, but I'll come back and collect it if I die. If I'm respawning. And yeah, I think like it's funny to listen to the clip because like I've always been aware of, or I've always thought of some stuff as useful that I guess is logistics in the sense. Just like, yeah, I'm old, but like a pocket full of Werther's Original to like huck at people so that we have a little bit of sugar to just like get some energy if we need it on the quick. And for morale purposes, like that sort of stuff is maybe something I wasn't thinking about in that context also.
I pulled this clip actually not for the logistics part, but for the first part. This was one of the first ones that I had listened to that I was like, this is interesting, and it's not a get pat moment. Like, it's the part about like, well, grand strategy and like the larger milsim, because at that time we had not played a larger milsim, and 300 people aside, still no tank divisions in Airsoft, clearly, right? But now having done that, one of the things that when it comes to like strategy, especially grand strategy, it only matters insofar as you have the capability of executing it.
Yeah.
And what I learned at that 300 player milsim is that when you are dealing with airsofters, your ability to execute strategy is highly contingent on their ability to actually complete the task that you assign to them and not wander off in a random direction.
Yep,
and
that's
not
fair.
Be like, shag this, I'm going back to FOB because I'm tired. I'm going to go get a snack, right? In a military context, you don't do that because that's your job, right? You don't go AWOL. I mean, people do go AWOL, but like, you know what I mean? Like, your task
broadly,
is this.
This is not an issue.
Yeah, you're here to execute this and so on and so forth. It's not like that. It wasn't like that because you're just dealing with players who are they're there to do whatever and just be a weekend warrior and play with toys and stuff like that.
The milsim stockade.
Right? Yeah, and there's no consequence really. It's like, I'm just gonna go back to FOB and chill, do whatever, right? Or I'm getting bored. Like, we were in that tunnel for 2.5 hours. Some other players were like, I'm just gonna go do other stuff, right? And so what I've really come to realize is that strategy in the grand sense in Airsoft it's not a thing for the vast majority of games, nor is it actually appropriate, or does it make any sense. And really what you're left with is either very small strategy, like small scale strategic plays, like me and the guys are going to do this because we think that when we do this, they'll do that, and then we can do this. Stuff like that, which you can consider tactics, right? But I mean, you can also consider it strategy, like just small scale strategy or large scale tactics, whatever you want to call it, right?
It is that, especially like at the, I think a military would consider, 30 people on 30 people doing something as part of a larger game to be, a tactical engagement. But like for Airsoft purposes, yeah, that's probably actually a strategic sort of thing.
When you think about, Iron Horse, right? Part of the reason that we were in that tunnel for 2.5 hours and guarding buildings 13 and 14 for 2.5 hours is because our platoon leader did not trust anybody else to actually hold that position, right? And case in point, when we left, they put another squad in our place, and they lost it almost immediately. Because presumably those players decided to just go like, we're bored, we're going to go do something else. And yeah, it was boring, but like that's part of I think the reality of something I just assumed, hey, if you have 300 players, you're going to have 300 compliant players who are capable of executing the mission that
I
you
mean,
task them with. And it's
especially
like, no.
especially when like, money is involved. But at the same time, you look at games we've run and the difficulty people had like organizing and coordinating 20, 30 people, 15 people at some points. Not because like, I mean, there's been like, radios and stuff, but like not because of a failure to be able to interact with them and say, hey, this is what we need you to do, but because a bunch of those players' responses to encountering anything other than what they were supposed to be doing was squirrel, right? Like
Yeah.
just whoop. And I've mentioned this before. Like, because this is a mindset loop that I trained in for wargaming, but like it's really useful for Airsoft as well, of just like, if at any point you have downtime and you're not thinking, how am I accomplishing my objective in terms of winning the game or progressing our teams winning the game or whatever I was told to do by command, like you should be rethinking about that. You should be trying to make sure you're always doing it. Right? Am I useful? Am I accomplishing something here?
Yeah.
And without criticism, because I know every single Airsoft player has done this, but like there are all periods where you're like, but like I could go over there and get into a firefight, right? Or like, oh, we won that firefight and they're pushing back, so we should push forward. Why? Because that's our default modus operandi. Okay, but the objective I want to be on is over here. Oh, yeah. Right, yeah, right. So yeah, there's definitely strategy to this, and there's definitely, I certainly had not thought about at the time, like the strategic application of, even, oh, hey, these are the players who are on my team who I know will get jobs done. I'm going to give them people to work with and dump them places.
Yeah.
And that definitely is strategic, right?
Yeah. And that's basically where we're at with that, right? That's sort of our limitation. So that's the one I wanted to play for that.
For sure, yeah. No, that's cool.
All right. Next up. We're here doing this podcast, and we're really confident about the stuff that we're talking about. But 5 years ago, we would have had a different conversation, but the exact same sort of confidence level.
Yeah, so I think it's important to always try and understand your perspective and try and understand or just even think about somebody else's perspective. Like what I try and do when I see a new player, I think, what does he think about looking at me? I look at him as like, is he just standing around by himself? Is he fiddling around with his rifle? Does he not understand how it works?
So yeah, 5 years ago, or I think this particular episode is like 4 something years ago, we were talking about, 5 years ago, how our opinions had changed and how we were so enlightened, right? 5 years ago, right?
And I think like some of that we've carried forward. I think we continue to do an increasingly good job of listening and communicating and trying to be aware of what like players who we're interacting with need. Like what Chris was just describing there is still a really good approach to like encountering a new player, and like before you talk to them, even just trying to assess like where their head's at, so that you can try to give them support, advice, get them in the game, whatever is going to work for them and you, so that you and both have fun and both like ideally achieve objectives and win games and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and for me, like I think having the Discord and having had so many conversations with people, one of the big things for me is, well, like what have I learned, right? What conversations have I had with people, and how has that challenged my beliefs and my opinions about certain things? And I think in particular about how I would always say, don't bother drawing your sidearm, just reload your primary. And because it's always, it's never faster to draw your sidearm. And Matt was like, that's BS. And turns out actually it's not. I'm right. He was right and I was wrong, right? And that's totally okay. But one of the things I've really tried to adopt is that last bit that Chris is saying, like, if I was a new player, what would I be thinking? Right. And so conversely, when I'm asking for advice from people, from, people's opinions who I care about various pieces of kit, if I was giving that advice to someone, what would I want them to do about that? And then apply that to myself, right? So, Jordan is giving me this advice about belt kits, right? How would I want to take that? How would I want him to take that advice if the roles were reversed? And am I going to take that advice that way? Do you know what I mean? Okay. Right.
And like, I think when we recorded that, we were aware of the idea that airsoft, to quote you, that airsoft's a big tent and that there's room for everyone underneath it. I think this last year, with you guys traveling, and especially especially this year with you guys traveling, but also the last couple of years as we've talked to just everyone on the Discord and gotten I think both better and broader perspective, has really resulted in just you and I are much more aware of how big the tent actually is. Like we were like, oh yeah, airsoft's a big tent. And it is. It's an enormous tent. It's much, much bigger than I
It's
thought.
a pavilion.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like we said, oh yeah, it's a big tent, thinking oh yeah, we've gone from a 2-man pup tent to a 20-person tent. No.
Yeah.
It's the big top. And yeah, I don't feel particularly embarrassed by that. That is the best information we had at the time. But yeah, I think, the ability to talk to people who have played a ton elsewhere and just get different perspectives is so much fun and so useful, right? Because none of our team were gonna John was gonna look at you and go, yeah, run a belt kit, and you were gonna be like, well, John has always run a belt kit and it works for his particular weird way of playing yourself, but and that's not you disrespecting John. It's just sort of you're so comfortable with his style being his style and your style being your style that you're not necessarily going to take that into account in the same way that you're like, oh, hey, this person is further away, they have more objective clarity, and they're looking at this and go, I run this, it's super effective for me, here's why and how, try it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, again, it's no disrespect to our teammates, it's just a matter of in some of the time, it is easier for me to take advice from the Discord than it is for me to take advice from shooting the shit with you guys over, a meal. Not because I don't respect your opinions, but because we're just chatting, right? It doesn't register as advice as much.
Totally. And you do sometimes need this drives my wife crazy, but she'll suggest maybe I'll have a problem or whatever with something hurts, and she's like, you should go see, take some time off, ice it, do whatever. I'll be like, yeah, whatever, I'll be fine. And then I don't, and then I go see a professional and they tell me exactly the same thing. She's like, well, why didn't you listen to me? And it's like, well, yeah, I probably should have, right?
It's that unfortunate thing where you're like, well, my best answer to that question is I am kind of stunned, and it's gonna have to do for now.
Yeah, and so sometimes you do, just for you to be okay with making a change requires a little bit of, like you were saying, a little bit of distance from the person giving you that piece of advice. But this is actually going to be relevant for one of the clips we're going to listen to after. So yeah,
good. I like that it's building towards something.
Well, I don't know if it's building towards something, but we've got a few more to get through, and I think one of them in particular will definitely apply.
I want to mention boots. So when I started playing Airsoft, I bought a pair of Blackhawk tactical boots for arid environments. Still have them. They appear to be indestructible. They're super comfortable, but I'm not sure they were the best to play when I bought them, and I'm not sure they're the best thing to wear now out of what I own. In fact, I don't necessarily wear them every game. Firstly, because we live in Newfoundland and it's often wet and cold here, and my hiking boots have a Gore-Tex liner, so they're waterproof and are a little warmer than my arid desert boots.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's this sort of impression I get from talking to a lot of new Airsoft players, and I certainly was one of these people, where you're like, oh man, tactical boots must be good, otherwise why would the military use them? And the answer is, well, they're good as we can get within the money we're willing to spend on gear for soldiers, right?
And yeah, the same but more so. I still have those boots. They are still indestructible. I just don't wear them very often. Their wear and tear has gone down sharply because my hiking boots are better for everything, right? And when I needed to replace my hiking boots, I didn't go look at tactical ones. And that's not to say that there aren't benefits to tactical boots for application. I think there probably are purposes where I don't even know who makes good ones these days. SWAT, 511, whoever makes good tactical boots, where they're offering something and that thing is what is needed for the job. But Airsoft and the job aren't the same thing. And realistically, the Canadian forces, I know because one of my students is doing basic right now, allows people to be like, no, I'd rather buy my own boots and to just like give them a bit of money towards them. And that he and almost everyone he's on course with just did that. You know, I'm not obviously I'm qualified to speak to policy. I don't really know how that works, but I definitely am qualified to say if I'm going to use boots for airsoft, I'm going to use whatever the most comfortable hiking boots I can buy are. And like I'm definitely not buying really expensive hiking boots. You know, like I'm going to Sport Check and being like, these are adequate for my needs, and they have been. You know,
you're rolling in Merrill Moabs, I'm pretty sure, right?
I am, yeah, and like they're not super expensive. I got them, you know, on sale, but like they're great. I have been wearing them for like they're my default winter boot / outdoor activity boot for the whole year round, pretty much. The current ones I'm wearing, I have not yet worn out. I think probably by the end of next summer or like sometime during next summer, I'll probably have to replace them, but they wear super hard. They're very comfortable. They do everything I need them to.
Yeah.
And they were like, even if they weren't on sale, I think I paid as much for them in 2024. Like I paid, when I bought them in 2024, I probably paid half what I would have paid for my Blackhawk tactical boots when we bought them like 15, 18 years ago. Like they were super expensive. And like, I think there are definitely things you can be doing where really expensive shoes are a solid application. You know, like if you were sending me to hike through the mountains somewhere, I probably would think about buying, like for a protracted period, I would probably think about buying expensive hiking boots. But for what I'm doing, like I'm not doing 3-day hikes. You know, and I'm not going anywhere where, you know, if my boots suck, it's going to do anything worse than like, oh man, I got a blister. Like, and that, even that has been not an issue in this context, right? Like, so yeah, I'm increasingly solidly on the, like the only reason to buy combat boots for airsoft is either like a specific look you're trying to go for, like an impression, or because you're, you know, you're getting started and you're relatively light on cash, and like they, you know, like secondhand ones are a decent boot that'll wear fairly well and like that has good ankle support and all that jazz. So like that sort of makes sense to me, but I also don't think there's something you should cheap out on. Like they're like iPro boots, then replica is kind of where I'm at still.
Yeah, see, for me, like I still have my Moabs, and I mean I use them every now and then, but I'm very much team trail running shoes now. I find that the trail runners are lighter, they provide better grip, and the whole, you know, there's a lot of literature now that points to the fact that the like ankle support you get from like hiking boots, or you supposedly get from hiking boots, is actually not a thing. And in fact, the added security, mental security that you get from thinking that your ankles are bulletproof because you're wearing hiking boots, in many cases actually makes you more prone to injuries. And I've experienced this myself. And I mean, this is anecdotal evidence, right? Your mileage may vary. I have never rolled my ankle in my my trail running shoes. I've never done it, right? In the context of airsoft. Did I do it when I was out actually trail running and being an idiot? Yes. But there's no boot would have saved my ankle in that context, right? There are what do they call them? Like ankle breakers, like holes that are like just shallow enough that anyways, long story short, not a vibe. At airsoft, in my trail runners, I have never rolled my ankle. One time last year, I wore my hiking boots, my Moabs as well, and I rolled my ankle that day, right? Is it anecdotal? Sure, right? But to me, I'm like, actually, the fact is, when I'm wearing my trail runners, I'm lighter on my feet. They have tremendous grip regardless. Like the tread is crazy good, but I feel like I'm more nimble, right? And so I'm very much, and you know, I wasn't the only one. Like when we were playing at Iron Horse, I had lots of people wearing like Salomon Speedcross, right? I know Matt the Storm Wizard plays, and he wears like Saucony Peregrines in like like lime neon green, as loud as possible, because that's his style. You
Love
can
it.
get them in more muted color. Same thing with Arc'teryx. Arc'teryx makes like trail runners that are like military style, so they're like OD or tan or whatever, and all of those are extremely light. Like you're talking hundreds of grams, not like, like I don't remember exactly how much the Arc'teryx weigh, but I think they're very, very light, like 150 grams or something, or
And
like ludicrous,
the
right?
thing that's funny, like about that, and like, maybe when I go to replace them this summer, I'll buy something like that. You certainly have the information. I know a guy,
Mm,
but one of the funny things for me about that is, so like the thing that's made the most difference to like how much I roll my ankle or otherwise damage parts of me playing airsoft really is, I needed like like go to a doctor and get medically designed
yeah.
insoles for ages, and just didn't know. And like to the point where I was regularly like crushing the cartilage in my knee and just eating dirt, which is super unfun. But also, like, one of the questions they asked me when I went to get that done was like, "Oh, do you roll your ankle a lot?" And I was like, "Yeah, all the time." Like, and like not on super rough terrain necessarily. And they were like, "Oh yeah, that's normal for this issue." Since I got those insoles, neither of
Yeah.
those issues recurs. So like, I genuinely think the stability of the footwear, and like the footwear being well designed for your specific needs is way more important than it being a hiking boot. Um, I I lean toward the hiking boot because like the Merrells that I have come in the desired size range for my big weird feet,
Mhm.
and like again are also a price point that I'm willing to spend on my footwear that I'm using for airsoft and walking outside in the winter.
Yeah. And not to mention, like just your ankle strength just in general, right? If your ankles are stronger, like if you're the kind of person who goes out and like is on your feet a lot and your ankles and your feet are strong, guess what? Are you more or less likely to roll your ankle and like actually like you can roll your ankle. Lots of people who have very high mobility, right? Flexibility, which is just strength through range of motion. They have a lot of range of motion in their ankle and they can roll it and they're fine. They don't actually roll it. They just roll with it and then just get back up
Yeah,
and
it's
whatever. So
there's no
that's also
necessary.
something to consider,
Yeah,
right?
you can do the motion without the injury.
Yeah. So if you're someone who's highly flexible, right, who has really good, strength through range of motion in your ankles, right, then you probably will be okay. If that's not you, well, there's lots of things you can do to make that happen too, right? So just another thought, but I just wanted to put that one out there because I definitely don't disagree. I think civilian hikers, great shoes. Don't buy military if you can afford it. Most of them aren't doing it, like you said. So why would you?
But yeah,
All right.
and I mean the trail runner thing is super useful to add into the sort of like,
Yeah. If you're
um
playing on like flat terrain, like a CQC or whatever, like yeah, just think about that. And I didn't know they existed 5 years ago. So there you
neither
go.
did I.
So here we go. Helmets look cool factor. You can get real helmets. You can buy real helmets. They tend to be extremely expensive, especially if you want one that is ballistic rated. But our question would be, why do you want one of those for airsoft?
Kevlar's really cool, folks, but like it's a bit redundant for airsoft, right?
Yeah, like I wore a real Kevlar helmet for that I had as a surplus and I wore it for years, and it was heavy and it was not particularly comfortable, and I had really good pads in it, and still I was not like super jazzed about it.
Hell, it's great if real things are being shot at you and exploding near you, right? Like
Right?
all over it. But again, we're playing airsoft.
Yeah. I still feel exactly the same way. I think that if the only thing you're doing is playing airsoft, you don't need real ballistic protection in anything that you're doing, except your iPro, of course, where like you're looking for that ANSI rating, EN, the European rating or whatever it is. Like you definitely want that.
Yep.
Aside from that, you don't need like level 3, level 4 plates. You don't need training plates. Like there's no need for that. And at that time, I still was wearing training plates because of whatever stupid reason I had built up in my mind that they were important. For a helmet, like I think that depending on where you play, a helmet absolutely can be good. Obviously, if you're wearing nods, you might need a helmet. Although when we played at Iron Horse, one of our players did not have a helmet and he just wore nods on a head strap, and that worked fine for him. Great. And a ball cap. Excellent. If you wear nods, you will probably want some sort of helmet mount. And you may want to get some sort of real helmet with a real suspension system as opposed to a repro one that might fail. But so you get like just a bump helmet, like a Team Wendy or whatever. But the idea of wearing outside of a reenactment or whatever, like a real Kevlar lid on your head, it's just not something that makes any sort of sense for airsoft. Like it's just not necessary.
Absolutely. And like, you know, so like the only way I'm getting a helmet for airsoft is if I buy like a Team Win, right? Like just my head is too big. What can you do?
But you don't even need one.
That's where
right?
I was going, right? Like, like I've thought about it. I've looked at them. I don't.
You look stupid in a helmet anyway.
Just that's the head. I mean, or the face. But like, I'm not sure we can do anything about that. But like, yeah, in practice, if I had an actual reason to wear it, like if I owned nods and was using them, I don't, and I'm unlikely ever to. The price point in Canada versus the likelihood of me going to a night game. But like, yeah, the only value a helmet has for me personally, because neither of those practical applications applies, is aesthetic, or like somewhere to hang my hearing protection off of. I don't really need either of those things, so I'm fine. Like it's not it's like I'm not disparaging them. Like, you can wear them as a part of your kit and have them look cool. You can wear them as part of your kit and have them be effective. And like even without the nods thing, like they're a useful place to hang a GoPro or hang a camera. Like that's one of the primary functions yours serves, to be honest, a lot of the time.
Definitely. Absolutely.
There was a point where I have a skate helmet that's spray painted, and like there was a point where I was wearing that up at Redcliffe, because there was like low hanging metal stuff with rust on it hanging from the ceiling, and like that was sort of an okay idea. But even there, I discarded that and just went back to a hat, and the hat was adequate.
Yeah.
I never.
And you can scrim a helmet, but like you don't need a helmet to scrim. You can do that in a boonie, and you actually look really cool in a boonie as opposed to a helmet. So like you get two birds stoned at once, as they say, right?
Yeah, and like they're also like, just my boonies are really comfy,
Yeah.
And they're again like weird factors to think about, but like that little bit of sun shading with the magnified optic is actually helpful to my life. So yeah, I'm definitely still on Team Boonie. I'm unlikely to not be on Team Boonie. I own a ball cap. I do use that for games too periodically. But like mostly I'd rather use the Boonie. It's fine.
Yeah, don't wear your real lids, your real Kevlar, your real plates to airsoft. Like, firstly, if you're only, I don't even know why someone would own them, but if you own them, like, there's no reason to be wearing them for airsoft.
Yeah, like if
are you flexing on someone? Like,
like if you're envisioning this as like, as a component of training or something, I mean, perhaps you're taking airsoft too seriously or doing some things that are otherwise puzzling, but I could sort of get it. Like, if you're doing, like, I know people who wear the same sort of chest rig to airsoft that is their work chest rig. And it's like, yeah, okay. In that context, you might want to keep it the same weight just because it's what you're used to and like it's what you've already practiced in. But outside of that pretty narrow context, like, yeah, you're tossing 50 pounds on to run around in. Okay, you'll be faster without it. If it's 50 pounds, you really don't need.
Yeah, exactly. All right, that was a short one. We got 2 left, so here's our second last one.
One thing I've looked at a bunch is the L85, but every airsoft version of it that I've ever lifted weighs a ton, and they're not pointable, they're not comfortable.
Yeah.
And my impression is that the guys issued them in England don't love them too much either for similar reasons.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a point where airsoft is imitating the real thing more than we'd like it to.
Yeah. All right. So before you jump in, one of the things you said is it's super heavy. Yeah. Well, why are you getting a 240 Bravo, bud?
So, I'll be straight with you. The L85. So, firstly, what was I thinking? Sorry to any actual L85 fans out there. I'm so very not one of you anymore.
He's sober today, so that's probably it.
I was gonna make that joke. I think so. I definitely have a like affection for playing, I guess, non-standard airsoft guns, like in the context of like, oh, this is something different. That's cool.
Hmm.
Um, the balance, like the back weightedness and just chunkiness of the L85 replicas that I've handled are also the internals are terrible. Like, oh my god. But yeah, in terms of weight, they also, frankly, I don't know if this is accurate. I feel like they weighed more than the 249 does, even though they probably, like, if I go check after this, I'm sure that like a shorty L85 weighs less than the 249 with the
It's
box
got
mag and
to.
everything. Like, it has to.
Yeah.
Um, so like I might just amend that to like they feel uncomfortable and junky. Um, I also haven't seen one in like 4 or 5 years. um, so yeah, I'm
And they're
definitely,
butt ugly.
yeah, I know. Like I'm definitely not there. Like in terms of bullpup stuff, not that I at this point in my life am really interested in owning a bullpup like airsoft gun. I have a like an AUG shorty, like a super compressed AUG that I got as part of a trade and took apart and was like, oh my god, I'm not even sure I can make this work right. And that's the
Hmm.
state it's been in for 2 years because I just don't care. Like every now and then I'm like, oh, I should put it back together and sell it, and then I look at what the specific model it is selling for, and I'm like, I'm not even sure that's worth the 2 hours of my time. Jesus.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, maybe I could put a HPA engine in it, and then I'm like, or I could put a HPA engine in something better.
A
um,
249, a 240 Bravo.
yeah, exactly. Or a 249 or a 416. Like the only gun
We
I,
already have an HPA and a 249.
yeah, exactly. But like I did that while I still had the AUG.
Ah, yeah, that's fair.
You
That is
know,
fair.
I think the only gun I've owned that I haven't like considered HPAing is the Grand, because that felt like heresy. Just I don't want to put a hose in this.
Yep.
You know, but yeah, ugh. You know,
Yeah.
like the 240 Bravo, like in fairness, unlike, you know, the 240 Bravo is probably going to be, you know, or definitely going to be like big and heavy and awkward if I do that. But like, at least it has the benefit of being cool as hell.
Yeah, it's going to look the part. Nobody's going to be intimidated by an L85. Whereas you show up with the 240 Bravo, everyone knows you're not afraid of anything,
Yeah,
right?
people will be concerned and will shoot lots of BBs at me.
Yeah.
Which is my normal airsoft game at this point.
I just thought it was so funny to hear that be like, oh, it's so heavy. And I was like, but hey, Pat's building a 240B. Like, what?
It's also,
what?
dude, there's no way it's as heavy as the 416 with a grenade launcher. Frankly,
Yeah, for real.
Frankly, I doubt it was as heavy as the M4A1 with the grenade launcher. Like,
yeah. Yeah, and just when you had that ACOG on there, that was really heavy piece of glass, junk piece of glass, but heavy.
Yeah, no, like I think,
yeah,
I don't think, I think it like it. What I really meant to say there was it didn't feel good in the hand, and I stand by that. But yeah, like going, oh man, it's really heavy compared to a lot of what I've rocked is preposterous.
Yeah,
like
I just did that one tickled me
totally.
when I heard it.
Like, just
all right, and here's our last one. For me to be able to take a piece of kit I've been using for 12 years and replace it with something else, it would have to be something that is very, very good, right? That makes me a lot more effective on the field, or is much easier to use, or is not holding me back. And in point of fact, the Slingster that I'm using now, I would say is probably one of the best pieces of kit that I own. So that is probably still true. Like, I think the Slingster is an excellent piece of kit, although I'm using it very differently now than I was using it before. Most of the time now, I just unsling it completely during games when I know I'm going to be moving around, because it just makes it a lot easier to just manipulate my replica and all this kind of stuff. But that's not the point of that I hauled this out for. This ties into what we were talking about before around getting different perspectives. And I think at the time, I was very much stuck in this mindset of, if I'm going to change something about what I'm doing, it's got to be bomb-proof. It has to be excellent. And now I have gone, I went full chest rig for one thing, but I have a belt kit. In fact, I went through 2 iterations and I haven't even hit a game yet.
I think,
right?
I think part of that is that, so at time of recording, I think we had a bit less like money in our pocket. But,
Well, I mean, yeah.
but like realistically, like that's a smaller factor than just, I think our mindset was what we've got is really, really good. And it's going to be hard to convince me to try new stuff. And that was definitely a bad mindset.
Yeah.
But I'm also, this is another one that I credit like our enormous luck in having developed such a good community of cool people to interact with about this, because we have a lot more people throwing ideas at us. And like certainly I've watched videos where people are like, yeah, run a belt kit with your whatever LMG. Sure. Like that video exists on YouTube, several of them.
Mhm.
But like I don't necessarily credit them, in the same way that like, one of the guys on our Discord who I've talked to a bunch going, oh yeah, I run a belt kit. It works for me. Here are some pros and cons. Like, oh, okay.
Or having the tailored approach, which is going to the Discord and being able to say, hey, so here's what I have. And people go, okay, well, why do you have it there? Right? Challenging your positioning, or challenging your thought process. And in a way that is not making you feel crappy. Like there's a lot of, if you go online, there's a lot of communities where people would just dump on you for just doing stuff, that's not optimized, as opposed to being helpful, being, asking you questions about it. And then sort of, at least for me, being open to, okay, well, let's look at this differently. Right. And there's I've had lots of conversations with Jordan, about, okay, well, I want to do belt kit. What about a flick? Do an FLC, fighting load carrier, right? It's $20, right? Surplus. And I have one, I got one, I tried it. It was, fine enough. And then I saw this belt. I'm like, okay, no, this is even better. It's sort of like that. Plus this other thing leads to this, and I think at time of recording that clip, I never would have done that. Right. It would have been like piecemeal, sort of like, okay, I might not, I'm not sure. Or I invested in something very cheap, like the chest rig on a whim. It's like, $40. We'll see what it gives me. And it was okay. So then, you can sort of dip your toe and try a little bit more. And now it's much more of like, no, let's just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks sort of approach. And part of that definitely is, yes, I have a bit more disposable income now than I did back then. But a big, big part of that is just not caring as much about having the best stuff all the time in an effort to try and find things that are better, more comfortable, more effective, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're going, okay, in order to purchase a new belt kit, I need to be convinced that it's the best thing I could possibly run. You're going to be reluctant to buy the new belt kit, right? It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be, like I really like my plate carrier. I'm not at this point opposed to the idea of buying and trying other stuff, but like it cost a bunch. It works really well. I've run it a whole lot. I really like it. That doesn't mean I shouldn't be open-minded to some Jordan going like, hey, Pat, try this. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And when you say plate carrier, you mean chest rig here, just for everyone to be clear.
I really do. I apologize. My brain's been like that today. So yeah, I think that works fine. I think, keeping an open mind and being flexible about it is really good. And I think it's not something that, necessarily I'm super good at, but I also think it's something, like because of those factors with the chest rig, it's like, okay, so it's harder to convince me to go try something. That doesn't mean that I shouldn't go try something. It just means that I have a bunch of stuff built up in my head that I need to sort of try to like walk around to get to trying that new thing.
Yeah, the threshold is like this. And I think for me now, the threshold is much smaller. Cue all the changes that I'm making to my kit in for this year, like with the belt and the 203 and the shells and like all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, previously I would have said, okay, well, no, I can only change like one thing at a time, right? Let's take one thing, let's master that, and then change something else. And now I'm like, who cares? Like, just do whatever. Like the stakes I feel are much lower. Because the payoff is much greater than I could have anticipated, I guess is where to say, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I, like, literally within the last month, you were like, you have a ton of space on your plate carrier, try putting your pistol on it. Ditch the belt completely. Just try running, or not, I said plate carrier again. Just, go grab your chest rig. What's on your belt? Okay, I was running a dump pouch in a bad place that wasn't useful. I was running extra mags that I don't ever use. Like 90% of the time I leave the field and unload those mags. And the only time when that's not true is when the refs are intentionally running a game where we're just going to dump all our ammo. And realistically, in that circumstance, in those games, it's actually like we're playing till I'm out of ammo. I'm actually a little better off having less mags and wasting less money. Because it's usually like, oh, zombies, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So don't need those. Do want to keep the sidearm. We were talking about this earlier in terms of like, oh yeah, M27 stuff. Likewise, frankly, with the LMG, like there are places on the field where we're not supposed to shoot auto, so it's like, oh yeah, I have a pistol, great. And I did that, and I was like, oh, yeah, this is completely fine. And like, I absolutely, without taking the pouches off and putting that on, if you had been like, hey, do you think this will work and be comfortable and be like effective? No, it's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had
and then you do it, and you're like, oh wait,
yeah,
actually, totally works.
Yeah, and like I think it's stupid is from like I had the first vest I ever had was like one of those black tactical like half cross draw vests, and it like that didn't work.
Yeah,
probably because it wasn't very good. Like it was a cheap piece of kit and it wasn't a great one. Okay, that was 18 years ago. Probably I should have tried doing this at some point.
Yeah,
especially given like I think this would have worked fine with the like I've got it set up currently with the universal holster, but like when I was running the PX4 in a little like concealable concealment Serpa, like that would have absolutely fit on the vest and taken up not a ton of real estate
no
and
space,
been small and comfortable. And it's like, okay, what do I get out of this? It really basically just frees up the suspenders to go back on my pants.
Yep.
Which is like, yeah, okay, great. And like I still have the battle belt, I still have the Cobra belt that's inside of it. I can still do stuff with that later if I want to. And I'm it also frees me up to go like, okay, well, I have these two things. Do I want to build a belt kit? Do I want to turn this into a separate second version of my kit to carry? And I was like, oh, well, do you have like pouches and stuff for that? Yeah, there were on it.
Yeah. And again, it's all part of that evolution. So I'm interested to see how, if we do this, if we're still doing this in 5 years' time, we can pull all these clips and listen to what we have to say, and and see if we still agree with it with our past selves. And in a way, I kind of hope we don't. Like, I hope that, our point of view has been challenged and changed. And I don't think it's going to change about the Kevlar and like real like bulletproof protection in Airsoft, guys. Like that's just foolishness. But for the rest of it, I'd like, I would love to be able to hear myself in 5 years' time and say, like, man, like that's what I thought. Like, I'm so glad I've grown and I've changed.
I'm like,
in my mindset, not just my gameplay, but my mindset especially.
I'm like, I think this podcast has been really helpful in that, like even just saying, oh man, maybe I should like put together a belt kit out of my spare stuff because I can. It's like, that sounds fun, right? This is like, this is a matter of like, okay, so like, yeah, playing to win on the field, taking that seriously, not like so seriously it's unfun or like you're a jerk, but like seriously, sure. But I think there was a point where it was like, oh, like this is my kit. It's the best it could possibly be. I've already thought it through fully. And like, there we go. Okay, try something new. Why? For fun.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like,
well, guys, hopefully you found this conversation entertaining, this retrospective. Encourage you to do the same thing for you. I mean, obviously, you're probably not. If you're listening to this, you may or may not have your own podcast that you can pull clips from. But think back to what you were doing 5 years ago and how things might have changed for you, and just try to think forward about what you might be wanting to change, or places where you might be holding a belief that deserves to be challenged, right? And is asking to be looked at critically to see if there's a better alternative out there for you.
And yeah, you also now know you can punish me by sending me L85 pictures, and that you can reward my good behavior by continuing the ongoing effort to get Pat to buy a 240 Bravo. Which this propaganda is working, and I'm not sure it's a good
guys,
thing.
Keep up the pressure. It'll happen sooner than you think. Guys, thank you so much for listening. That's all we've got for you this week.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Take care.